Welcome everybody to my part 2 of my Warpath How to Play series. This is the second part, and if you want to check out the first part, I highly recommend you do so. That just goes over the basics, kind of an intro. Today we will be talking about some core concepts that you'll need to know in order to play the beta and the eventual actual edition. So, let's just jump right into it. Like most war games, the models that you end up using are called units, and there's different classifications for units, so that can range from your basic infantry unit, large infantry, or massive infantry. And let's just go through some examples of that right now. So this here is an example of the three different infantry types. First, and the most basic version, is a team of stage 3s for the plague. These are your generic sized troopers. It is 5 models per base. The base is then called a team, so this is a team. One set of 5 miniatures on one base. That's a team. Multiple teams can make up a unit. What can also make up a unit is large infantry. Large infantry is typically on the 40mm size bases, so these stage 2s here are a pretty decent example of that. And that's only 2 per base. Finally, we have massive infantry, and massive infantry is just that. It is large, massive, and it works solo. Lastly, we have vehicles, and vehicles, such as the Strider, or perhaps a tank or something like that, operates in the same way as a massive infantry. It is a solo unit that doesn't need other sets of miniatures around it because it's so massive. However, there are vehicle formations in which 2 or 3 Striders, for example, might be next to each other and they might fire at the same time. So for my bases, I actually, I'm still working on a practical way to do this. You can also buy the bases eventually when the products are released. But basically the bases should house 5 miniatures. All I did for this is get some of that plastic cardboard stuff you can find at most hardware stores. It's quite cheap, and you can cut it with like scissors or a box cutter, and it seems to work pretty well. Another thing to note is that position on the actual base does not matter, and if you don't want to use your models for Dreadpathzone or for Firefight or something like that, you can actually make these into really cool dioramas. I won't, because I play both Dreadpathzone and Firefight. But if you wanted to, you could put them in any order, it doesn't matter. You can have all 5 guys bunched up, or you can have them all spread out. It really doesn't matter. All that matters is that they are a team, and they function as such. In terms of unit coherency, teams are then put in with other teams from the same unit, and if those are in the same unit like that, they have to be within 2 inches of each other in an uninterrupted chain. You cannot have any friendly or enemy models within 1 inch of your guys, otherwise they will engage in fighting, or just to keep things clear, you need to know which unit is which. So don't confuse that, and don't put them too close to each other. Like I said in my previous video, the game uses D6s, the standard 6-sided die. These are very important, and they also function as your D3s. For those who've never played a war game before, D6 just means that's how many sides of the die there are. If I said D8, that means 8 sides of the die, so it would be a different shape. But since you can't make a 3-sided die, you just take the result of a 6-sided die and apply it. So a 1 or a 2 is a 1, a 3 or a 4 is a 2, and a 5 or a 6 is a 3. And a 5 or a 6 is a 3. That's really in special rules that like to multiply things and that sort of thing, so that'll be more in the special rules section, but that's just what a D3 is in case you didn't know, which most of you probably did. For those Dreadpathzone players out there, this one's completely different. So in Dreadpathzone, when you modify a test, you can modify the amount of dice, and you never change the stat. In this, however, you modify the stat and not the dice. So the dice will stay the same number, so say you're rolling 4 dice, that's going to stay no matter what happens. So if there's any modifiers to your test, say you're closer to someone, so it's easier for your unit to shoot the other guys, the amount of dice never changes in this game, unless it's multiplied by a special rule. Instead, the stat will change. So if you had a accuracy stat of 4 up, and you were really close to the guy that you're shooting, it would be 3 up. So that's a huge difference between Dreadpathzone and Warpath. and it's definitely something you need to know, so that's why this is super important. If there's ever a time that you get to re-roll something, you re-roll it once, and that's your second result. If it gives you an option, you have the chance to re-roll or something like that, you roll it, and that's what you're stuck with the second time around. So you get what you get on the second roll. And you can't re-roll re-rolls. Measuring is all in inches, and you can measure at any time you want. So if you're unsure of how far away something is, check first, because there's no penalty for that. Back in like 4th edition 40k, they would say you can't do that, and that just caused a lot of problems. So this one, and like most war games now, you can check things like that at any time. This is the section that will be covering the unit stats. So there's quite a few different things on each stat card, and they are all important in their own way. So here we go, we're just going to run down the list. In the back of the beta, and I'm sure in the back of the book for Warpath and Warpath Firefight, all the units for each faction will be laid out, and that's what you get to select from when you're building your roster. The first thing on these lists will be the unit name. So, for example, a Stage 2A Plague would be the name of the unit. And then it will tell you how many teams are in a unit. Some of them have a minimum limit, like zombies start at 2 and can go up to like 8. The standard is usually you need 1 team, and you can go up to 4 or so. Enforcers and things like that are elite, usually like a 1 to 2. And that's called the unit size. Next we have the speed value. The speed value is quite literally how fast the unit can go. This is given in a number, and this number is how many inches they can move when they do a move action, which we'll get into later. But this is very straightforward. It's just the amount of inches. So the standard for like a human basically is 5 inches. So everything else is kind of based around that. So 5 inches, and everything else, if you're a beast or a jet bike or something, it's way faster. And if you're something really big and fat, it's probably slower. Next we have the accuracy stat. The accuracy stat is, again, pretty self-explanatory. This is the stat that your guys need to shoot the other team and see how many hits they can get. For example, a unit that has an accuracy of 4 up would roll their dice, and any dice that are under 4 would get discarded, and the other ones would be registered as hits to the enemy. Keep in mind that any roll to 1 always misses, and any roll of 6 always hits. So you always have a chance of doing something, albeit a slim chance, and no matter how good the odds are stacked in your favor, you can still misfire and completely miss a unit. This next stat is only for Firefight. So Firefight has a melee stat, and the way the melee stat works is the same way that the accuracy stat works in Warpath, but it's only in close combat. So if your units are within 1 inch and they start fighting the enemy, this is the stat you use to find out how many hits are registered first. This is to represent like parrying, dodging, how good your guys are with whatever weapons they have, that kind of thing. Next is the defense stat. The defense stat basically covers the idea of how well armored your guys are and how tough they are in general. So let's just say a unit was shooting and they rolled some dice for their accuracy stat. They hit another unit. So let's say they got 4 hits in. So you would grab those 4 dice, and now you would roll them and compare it to the defense stat of the enemy. So it's important to know all your stats, because the enemy is going to be shooting at you, and you need to know how tough your guys are. Things that are heavily armored or very strong, like vehicles, usually have a higher defense stat, and things that are a little more squishy and not as well armored are usually a lower number. So the higher number you have in a defense stat, the better. And in fact, this number can go above 6. Defense stats that are higher than a 6+ mean that you need some sort of special weaponry in order to inflict damage. So this is an easy way of basically saying that things like tanks can't be harmed by some guy with some pistol. The way to hurt things that are higher than a 6+ is through damaging with AP weapons that have the ability to cut through armor. But we'll get into how AP works specifically later, but that's basically the gist of it. If you have a high AP number, that's how many defense stats you're able to ignore. So once hits are registered, then you would roll those dice again and compare them to the defense stat of the enemy unit. So let's just say they're shooting at a unit that has a defense of 5 or higher. So now the dice that have been rolled to hit need to roll again, and if they are higher than the number of the defense stat, then we go on to resilience. Now the resilience stat. The resilience stat is a little bit more unique to this game. I can't think of a direct comparison with this one, but basically it's how much damage and things like that that your unit can endure. So, back to our example, unit shoots, then you roll against the defense. If you have enough damage that goes through the defense and you meet the resilience number or you exceed it, then one team would be removed from play. This is an all or nothing system. So basically, if I had a unit that had a resilience of 3 and the enemy got 3 that go through, it would kill the unit. If they only got 2 and my resilience is still 3, then nothing would happen to that unit. It wasn't an effective shot. While editing this video, I realized that I forgot to mention Firefight here. Resilience works slightly differently in Firefight. Basically, the way it works is how you would normally treat wounds in other game systems. Instead of removing a team when resilience is met, you just take out one guy. Most units of basic troopers have resilience of 1, and then bigger creatures have larger number for resilience. So those work just like wounds, and honestly, I think they should call that wounds, because having resilience there is kind of confusing compared to Warpath proper. Anyways, back to the rest of it. Next we have the nerve stat, which works in a very similar manner to the resilience stat, except this one is basically just measuring the morale of your guys and how sturdy they are when they are under suppressive fire and that kind of thing. This is the stat that is used to compare units to when they're getting shot at, if they go hit the deck and try to duck for cover for all they can, or if they just straight up can't take anymore. The threats of war have exceeded what they were expecting and they can't handle it anymore, so they bail and they completely flee the battle. They just spread out and that unit is no longer effective whatsoever. Also on the stat card you will find the denomination of what kind of unit they are. So again, like the regular infantry, the large infantry, massive infantry, vehicle, that kind of thing. So that's the basic stat line, and under the stat line will be the available teams that fit that stat line. So units like the GCPS have an overarching stat line for a GCPS Marine, but then you could kit them out with different weapons and things like that, and those would be different teams. And so they would use the same overarching stat line, but they might differ in what they carry. So this is the teams section. Each team has a point value, and the point value is very important because this determines how large scale your game will be. The standard points is usually about 2,000 per side, and obviously better units will have more expensive point values, so things that are very expendable like zombies will be very low points, and things that are very well armored like a tank will be very high points. There's also upgrades found in the stat cards. Things like a heavy machine gun that you might be able to add into a unit, and this will just be an additional point number. So basically, if I wanted to give this stage 3 unit an HMG, you would just purchase that little upgrade, and usually there's restrictions and limitations on those things. And this basically is just a way of keeping track of who can take what, and so you can't make certain units too overpowered. Teams can also have special rules, and that will be indicated on the stat cards. So all Forge Fathers seem to have Headstrong because they're very stubborn, and that's also found on these stat sheets. Finally, it will show the weaponry that the team contains, so it will usually have the assault weaponry that they have for close quarters combat, and it will have whatever guns, if they have any, that they carry. So the guns will have a range on them, they will have how many dice they get, and this is by team unless you're playing Firefight, in which case it's per guy, so it'll be like 1 die for a rifle or something like that. But in Warpath proper, it will be multiple dice, which means per team. The weapons have a range, they have how many dice, and then they have any special rules that might apply. For example, a heavy machine gun is really good at suppressing people, so it'll have the suppressive fire special rule. Also, AP, which I briefly touched on before, is armor penetration and how good the weapon is at punching through enemy armor. So things like heavy laser cannons are very very much designed to puncture enemy vehicles and that kind of thing. So high AP weapons are designed to punch through enemy armor. Well, now that you've seen the basic stat line, basic stat cards, I think that's probably good for one video. I will see you in part 3. Next time we'll start getting into how cover works, how line of sight works, and we'll start getting into how the game is really played. So stay tuned. Thank you for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and keep rolling 8s.